I feel as though I've known you for ages and that you're family, but I actually cannot remember how we met or when we met.
Honestly, you felt sort of ever present in my life. I really can't remember. I think it was Downing Street during Black History Month, which is quite cool, isn't it?
It is cool. It is cool, and we hit it off. If I think about your career, and you've had an amazing career, and if I think about how you started, so you sort of started at Evening Standard.
Yeah.
You then moved over to GQ.
Yeah, to Esquire.
To Esquire.
And then to
GQ.
And then to
Vogue.
Yeah.
So, national newspapers, men's magazines.
Yeah.
Did that help with a transition to a women's magazine? Was there any lessons that you learned?
Definitely. To have a voice, you have to be quite bold, and you have to dig deep for confidence, because it's a space where women are not necessarily excelling, I think I also just sort of felt really that if I could run a men's magazine, and I was the first woman to run that business, then why couldn't I do a women's? Coming to Vogue felt like coming home. So it was kind of a process of feeling really confident.
If you think about women's magazines, loads of women work on women's magazines, but in terms of being in the most senior position on women's magazines, it's still rare. Why is that?
There's a myriad of things happening to even be considered, I had to be doing much better than perhaps my male counterparts. Understanding that we have the commercial skills there's still some work to be done. Yeah. I also think that some of these organisations that have been our heritage organisations have some work to do around maternity as well. I do see really talented women getting to a certain level and choosing, in inverted commas, to opt out because their work-life interface just isn't workable because of the rules of the organisation.
Which are not necessarily set on a equal standard.
They're not set on an equal or real standard. I think often equality is not about the same, right? So if only women can carry and deliver children, then there are some considerations that are needed for women if they're talented and so on. I don't even think it's about actual maternity leave. I think the perception of potential maternity also plays into this, because I've been in conversations where there are discussions about who to promote into a certain job, where the conversation falls to isn't she about to get married, which means she's probably about to, and that person is basically out of the running because of something that she might not want to have children. So I actually think this is a challenge for all women, whether they choose to have children or not, but also for everyone, because great leadership is great leadership, and for female and male, all employees, if you can have the best person at the top, irrespective of gender, then we'll all rise.
And irrespective of what the childcare situation is as well, as if having your son is going to stop you.
I'm interested in how you feel that's changed your approach to work, being a mother.
I think I've always been passionate about talent and equality, but I think when you can then see the world through the lens of your child, it makes you more passionate.
Changes.
Totally, it absolutely does, and it makes you want things to be fair. So I'm going to talk about Vogue and coming into this role.
Yes.
And first of all, coming in with a creative partner like Edward.
We knew each other before, but when we got together to talk about this project and everything, we were finishing each other's sentences. He's a creative mind through and through, but somebody who really respects what I do and the commercial imperative and vice versa. It's just really collaborative, and the old kind of church and state, it just doesn't work anymore because consumers don't see the world in that way. They don't see well, that's advertising, so I'm going to look at it and consume it in a different way to this, which is editorial. It's kind of content, you know, it all needs to measure up, it all needs to fit into the same mission.
Decline in circulation, decline in revenues, but Vogue is sort of bucking the trend. And is part of that because of your focus on branded content, is part of that because of how you've decided to make Vogue much more inclusive. I'd love to talk about that.
What's happening in the print world is a lot of brands and companies are coming to the point where they start thinking about how to stem decline once they're already in the throes, by which point it's already run away from you. We are very, very lucky with Vogue that we have a brilliant brand platform. The difficult job that I had when I came on board was everybody was saying, well, everything's great. You've got a really easy job. You just kind of just keep things going. Well, from my perspective, it's like, well, nothing lasts forever necessarily, and we need to use our strength now to do the future proofing rather than once things start to slip. So there are a lot of challenging and difficult changes that we had to make around digital, around how we engage socially, around what the magazine does, what each role in the magazine meant. But it's really hard often to convince people of change until they feel the pain. But when you're feeling the pain, it's kind of too late.
Yeah.
We really were pushing for diversity of perspective and having people who are very different. Yeah. But when you have a brand where there is a perception that the doors aren't open, I kept hearing, well, those people don't apply here, so maybe they don't exist. A lot of people from more diverse backgrounds thought that they wouldn't have a good time of it.
They wouldn't belong.
Yeah, they wouldn't belong. The pool of people applying for roles looked like everybody in the roles already, and everyone else thought, I won't belong there. And to be honest, to a certain extent internally, people were saying, well, we've put it out there in all the fair channels and they're not coming. Yeah. So you're asking for something that doesn't exist. Yeah. And that, if I'm honest, on the business side, is something I still need to work on.
I remember starting in the early 90s in the industry, and and there just was it was an urban myth, and it was a fact that if you put a woman of colour on the front cover of a magazine, sales would decline. Yeah. If you put a woman over 40 on the front of a magazine, if you put a woman that wasn't size 8 on a magazine, you wouldn't sell anything. And I think what yourself and Edward have done, and the team that you have around you at Vogue, is shatter some of those urban myths. But how did you convince, because there has to be a sales pitch somewhere to sort of allow you to demonstrate it and prove it?
Edward always had this strapline of normalising the marginalised. We would never put someone on the cover because they were other, right? They had to have a good reason and interest and all of those things. So no tokenism.
Yeah. So the reason they're there is not
because women want to know more about them and they're exciting and so on and so forth. So no ticking of boxes. You know, our September 2019 issue, which was guest edited by HOH, the Duchess, is now the highest selling issue of the decade and the fastest selling issue ever of Vogue. And that cover features no one who would have been featured before. So we have disability activists, we have trans, we have obviously women of colour, plus size, women in politics, and you know, that proves the point. Our second best-selling issue was Rihanna, and I could not believe when we did Rihanna on the cover, there had never been a woman of colour on the September issue of Vogue in its history. The idea that British Vogue was doing this and challenging these myths sort of started to pepper through other media brands, and I remember this kind of seminal point in my time at Vogue was going to the newsstand, as I do on release dates for the September issues of my first September, and for the first time ever seeing every single cover of a women's magazine having a woman of colour, because they were all thinking, this is what Edward's going to do. And so having someone lead on that and take the chance then inspired everyone else to say, we should do it too.
And normalises it, so it doesn't become
and
such
it works, And so in year one, those myths were completely dispelled. I thought it would take a good chunk of my career. She's so good.
Oh, you're both good.